Okay. So if you're using Postgres, then it'll be something like, and well, let's just imagine, let's make a new route for venues for the show route, right? So that would be more appropriate for this setup. So we'll do ID, right? And then we'll do something like def show venue, and you pass through the ID. And now we'll connect to the database, create a new cursor object. So let's do that. And now we'll do cursor.execute. Select all from venues where ID equals. All right. So with Postgres, we do %s, okay, comma, the tuple. All right. So we take the ID originally from the route, pass it through the function, then ultimately pass it through here. This is the Postgres version. If this were SQLite, then you have to do cursor.execute, select all, and it's a question mark here. So it's a question mark. All right. Got it.
Okay. That was totally our issue.
Yeah, it's confusing.
We were doing the Postgres way in SQLite.
Yeah. We'll hopefully move more to Postgres. So, yeah, I think Postgres, now that you all are more familiar with it, it's probably might be easier to work with. And it is just, it is like production level database, whereas SQLite is not. Okay, so let's do this one for now. So we'll do select all from venues. Is that right? Yeah, select all from venues, cursor.fetch all. And then this will be some records. And we'll just return the records. Remember that what we want to do, if we just do this, it'll probably break. Sorry. So I'm going to do Python 3 and then run the source main.py file. And then go to /venues. So you can see the view function did not return a valid response. The return type must be a string tuple, but it was a list. So that's because, right, this is a list. We want to JSONify it. This will still break, but for a different reason. So now we'll do JSONify, right, which remember will like stringify the data. And then here we have, this is where we're importing it from. And then we'll refresh. Okay, so now it says, basically JSONify doesn't know how to convert something of type decimal to a string. So we can use, if you Google, so one thing I would encourage you to do, right, like Google the error. Like I'm not saying this will necessarily always give you the right answer, but just Googling the error, people may have encountered it before. So you can see this is kind of, I like this. Like I like the JSON.dumps thing. There's also, I wonder if they have default. Yeah, this default equals none. I'll just show you the way that I would do it, which is you can import JSON. I think we could do this. See, I'm importing JSON. And then instead of JSONify records, I'll do JSON.dumps the records, and then just do default equals string. I think this will do it. So we'll try to convert all the data to be of type string. Let's see, and that works. Okay. So just to show you that again, I'm importing JSON, the JSON library. Then I'm just doing JSON.dumps. I can pass through my whole list, and then default value equals string. Okay. And how did I know that? Just from Googling. Okay, so the next thing, I wanted to just get this working and get something returned, but what we really want to do is turn each one of these records into an instance. If you look at the models, it can be confusing, what this is doing. So we can talk through it. The other thing, there's a couple things also just to know about reading a code base in general, which is the tests lots of times serve as documentation, right? They give you an example as to how to use the functions, right? It's like when I use the function this way and pass it through, I expect this result. So, I encourage you to look at the tests, and then also like the console.py has some good hints. So let's look at the console. I'm going to press Command P to do the search, and that there is no console. I thought there was. I guess I'm wrong. Okay, let's look at this.
It's C.py, right?
Oh, seed.py, thank you. Yeah, this is better. So this connects to the database. It connects to the cursor. We then see we have this, call this drop records function. What does this do? How do we know? Well, I'm doing not a great naming, like this is not the best, right? Because I would prefer if instead of importing star, I imported the drop records function and maybe the save function directly, just to be more explicit. But even if I didn't do that, you can press Command click to see what's going on here. So what this is doing is deleting all from the table name, right? And so it's dropping records, passing through a connection to the database, and delete all from venues, right? Venues is the table name. So delete from venues, followed by delete from categories. Okay. Then this is kind of where we can see how our code can be used. It's creating 2 new venues, then somehow saving them to the database, and then creating 2 new categories. And again, you can kind of just like run this file, I think. Let's close it. Python 3 seed.py. And now I ran the file. And now if I go look at Foursquare development, psql-d Foursquare development, this should have select all from venues, right? You can see these are the 2 records that were inserted. So this is kind of interesting. It looked like this works. Somehow we are able to, just kind of use the keyword arguments here. So the way that, just to kind of like play with this a little bit, the way that this can work, is that this right here is just initializing an object, all right? And we are set up, if you look at the venue.py file, we can put a breakpoint here to kind of walk through the code. And then let's, sorry about that. And now let's go run this. Let's just run this one. So we'll run Python 3 again, seed.py, and this will initialize a venue, or begin to, and then it will break. It will hit our breakpoint. Okay, so we hit our breakpoint. And now let's take a look. So we have this star kwargs. And you might remember this. You all might remember this. That is taking the keyword arguments. If we look at what kwargs is a dictionary of the keyword arguments, right? So here we're using these different keyword arguments, and they're all accepted apparently, basically, because we're accepting the keyword arguments, and now here we're doing kwargs. Anything that you pass through, it will be represented at kwargs. And now the next thing we're doing is kwargs.keys. So why are we doing this? What we want to do is kind of put a restriction and say, hey, if you try to pass through a key that's not one of these columns, I'm going to raise an error. So let's see that, actually. Let's see the error occur. So we'll do Python 3. We'll use this as my console by making it interactive. So do seed.py. Let's remove the breakpoint. And now, if I do this, if I create a venue, but this time let's add another key value pair. So foo equals bar, right? You see that foo is not in columns. And then it prints out the columns. So again, how did it do that? We're taking all the keyword arguments, Foursquare, blah, blah, and then I added foo. It's catching them here. We're saying kwargs. Kwargs is the dictionary of the keyword like values, arguments that's being passed through, looking at the keys. If this list of keys is not one of these columns, raise an error that, hey, this key is not in self.columns, okay? If we get through here and there's no error rate, so once it raises the error, it breaks. None of the rest of the code is run. If however, we get through here and, you know, everything's good, then for each of the key value pairs in the list of tuples, we will, this is a new function, we'll set the attribute on the object. So we'll basically do self dot, you know, ID equals that ID. Self dot Foursquare ID equals whatever. Okay, so this is how this works. You'll see this, like, I don't know. This is more of a pattern, I guess, of what you'll see. So this was already set up for you, essentially, to just be able to initialize an instance, right, with keyword arguments, and then it will, this will catch them, right? This will initialize the data so long as you provide valid keyword arguments. And you can just confirm that by now doing this dot dunderdict. All right. What else? One other thing to note. So you can kind of pass through. This might feel confusing. One, you don't have to pass through all the keyword arguments. So it will still work. Okay, why? Because it's just looping through the ones that exist. For each of the quarks, right, for each of the keyword arguments that you pass through, set the attribute. And only break if you pass through something extra that's not on the columns. So this is pretty flexible type of code, right? They don't have to be in the right order, anything like that. Because we're just going through the pairs, setting the attribute on each one, right, for each key value pair. So that's one, you know, kind of nice bit of flexibility here. What else did I want to point out? Oh, yeah. So you can pass through, you can basically take keyword arguments, and the star here will turn it into a dictionary, right? Allow you to catch this as a dictionary in here. You can also, instead of passing through keyword arguments here, what you can do is, right, you can, this may feel confusing. This may take a second. You can pass through a dictionary of, like, let's call these my attributes, all right? And let's say the Foursquare ID is, you know, like that. And then the name is La Famiglia. All right. And now let's make a new venue. You know what? I also want to put a breakpoint here. Sorry. Let's just copy this and exit out real fast. Oh, how did that? Let's do continue. We're good. Okay, so I'm back. I'm at the back of the bottom of this file. All right. So now let's go here. We'll set the attributes, and we will create a new venue and pass through the attributes. Now, if you just pass through the attributes, this will not be what you want, because we're going to be, you know, I don't even know if that will work. Like, what we want to do is do the, remember originally we had like Foursquare ID equals. So instead what we're replacing that with is actually star of the attributes. And when we're initializing a venue, like kind of from outside the class, right, this star will take this dictionary and turn it back into the keyword arguments. Then when we catch it over here, so this turns it into the keyword arguments kind of before it even enters the init function. It turns it into this format of like venue parentheses Foursquare ID equals. Like it turns into that. Then this star is going to turn it back into the dictionary. Do you kind of get that? So it's like, it's a little confusing, but what we're doing is we're going from venue, the star dictionary, turns it into this, and then, and we're doing this because it'll be easier, it might be easier to initialize data this way, And then if we do this star star attributes, and then by the time, and it comes through like this, and then by the time we get here, this star star is going to convert it back to a dictionary. That way we can run the rest of this function. So let's see that. I'm going to pass through star star of the dictionary, which will turn it into this thing. And now we're back in the init.py file, line 8. So this star star will turn it back to a dictionary. So let's look at the quarks. See that? Now it's back to a dictionary again. And now we will, make sure each one of these keys is in the columns, and then we'll set the attribute. So alright, so that's kind of a procedure if we want to, we can go through, is this kind of way of initializing data. Why do I go through that? Because if we go back to the main.py, remember this is going to be a list of tuples. So it's going to come through like this. I guess Foursquare ID, the Foursquare ID, like 6262, things like that. The name, Famiglia, all that stuff. All right. What are we going to want to do? Let's just take a single record. So one record will look like this. Let's put a breakpoint here. Source main.py. All right, so we want to hit this venue and we want to hit this breakpoint. So the way that we do this is by directing my Flask app to /venues. So let's refresh this page. That should take me here. So if I look at records, maybe slice the first couple. There we are. So now you can see let's look at one single record. Go back to what we learned in week 1. Just do it for one first, right? All right. Okay, so we have one single venue, right? Or venue record. And what do we want to do? We want to initialize a venue object out of it. And we said the way that we can kind of do that is to, kind of create that attributes dictionary. So how do we... don't do that to me. So how do we do that? So here's my record still. No, it's not. Let's just hit it again. So here's my record. No? Oh, it's records, sorry. And then record square bracket 0 is the record. All right, so here's my record. And now what we do? We can do venue.columns, and that gives me the list of columns. And then I can take this data and zip it together, right? Zip together the keys, which is venue.columns, with the values, which is the record, and then turn that into a dictionary, and then call that my attributes. Okay, so now we're back to where we started, essentially. And now what we can do is initialize my venue ** with these attributes, and call that my venue. And then if you look at it, it looks pretty good. Okay. So what did we do? We said that we can kind of, if we have this dictionary, we can pass through the data, and and just do the **, right? And it will properly initialize. So we wanted to go from this tuple to the dictionary. And the way we did that was started with this tuple. These are my values. The venue.columns are my keys. Where do they come from? Venue.columns, right? And then we can just zip them together and convert to a dictionary, right? So that would work. Let's just do that for one. Record equals record /0. And then we'll do take the venue.columns, that's my keys, zip that together with the record, and then I'll create a new venue from this dictionary. Sorry, and I'll call this my attributes. Right, and then I'll pass through the attributes and do the **, and that will be a venue. And And then I'll just dump this thing. And this will just be one of them. But that's alright. We'll fix it. And it breaks. Why? I'm not sure. Records, fetch all. Get the first one. Let's put a breakpoint here. It could be... we'll see. Let's refresh. So let's look at the venue.dunderdict. So I'm going to work backwards, essentially, and see, does this look good? That looks good. Oh, I know why. You can't just... Guys, you can't just throw an object back through the internet wires and it knows what a Python object is. We need to throw the attributes of the object back. You see? I was just returning the instance. I need to do venue.dunderdict. This will work. Let's try this. So I'm going to refresh if it lets me. Continue. That works. So my issue was that I didn't have this dunderdict here, and so it's trying to like JSONify an object, an instance of the venue class. It doesn't know how to do that. I need to at least make it close to JSON by converting this to a dictionary. Okay. So what I want to do, of course, is not do this for a single record, but for all the records. So now we can loop through it, and we can say something like, and let's call this venue records. So say for venue record in venue records, we will kind of like do this whole thing. Zip this together and create a venue. And then do the ***. And these will be my venues. And then and then this is going to be annoying. These are all venue instances. So what I'll need to do is convert each of these things back to a dictionary. It feels pointless. Like I said, it makes more sense when we have more items in our class, when we have actually more methods in our class. So now what we have to do is, instead of converting one thing back to a dictionary, go through all my objects, convert them back to a dictionary. So I'll call these my venue dics. And we'll just say, all right, for venue in venues, could do venue.dunderdict. See, not too much typing. And then return this. This, I think, will work. And it breaks. Yeah, alright, let's go back to incognito. This looks good. Okay, why does this not look so pretty? It's because I'm in incognito mode. And incognito mode doesn't have my browser. Like, this browser, I think I installed like a Chrome extension or something that prettifies the JSON. Here, it looks pretty again. You know, I probably have some sort of extension to prettify it. So just to show you again kind of like what's happening here, we're selecting the data. This is giving me back a list of tuples, right, that we're getting back, storing them as venue records. Then we're taking each one of these records, zipping it together with the columns, right, turning it into a dictionary, and then turning that dictionary into an instance. And this is where it kind of feels pointless. Now we're turning it back to a dictionary. Why are we doing that? Because eventually we'll have more methods here that will be useful. And so we need to turn it to a dictionary because we want to throw JSON as our response. And then we're JSONifying these dictionaries with the JSON.dumps. Does this feel okay? Do you at least follow this? Yeah, okay. Questions about this or things to move more slowly through?
I did it without dumps, so the output is same. So what is
Really?
the
You might have a different version of Flask than I do or something. Maybe you have a more updated version. For me, it breaks. Yeah, I think for other people it didn't as well. Okay, well, I'm happy to share this code. Other things to start to go through is, so ultimately we're going to start moving, like kind of just making our app a little bit more professional. One thing to do generally is things like this, like your database configuration. As I kind of mentioned, we're going to want to be able to switch between like a test database and a development database and a production database. So hard coding this string everywhere is not a great idea. Instead, what you want to do is use environmental variables so that like when you're in one environment, like your development environment, it will be Foursquare development. But you can easily deploy this to AWS and start using Foursquare production. And it's not a great idea to just like use Command F, search replace, because you can forget it, right? Like one time, right? And you're deploying to production, right? So it's not a great idea. So instead what you can do is you can use environmental variables, right? So environmental variables are stored in your terminal. So if I do print_env, you can see them. These are all environmental variables. So for instance, you can access them with like the $, I believe. So I can do this echo, meaning just like display $, term program. And this is how I'm accessing like an environmental variable. You can also set new environmental variables by just using the word export. So now if I do echo $foo, right, it returns to me bar. One thing that's like not great about this is if I press Command T, like create a new shell session, and now I do that same line of the echo $foo, it's gone. Okay, so with each new shell session, your environmental variables are reset, are reinitialized. Okay, so then it's like, well, how do I make something a little bit more permanent? And you can do this with the, if you look at the, yeah, you can, actually that was fine. There we go. So if you look at this file, this bash profile, this here you can set, this file will be run when your shell session starts. So did it boot up? Hold on. There we go. So you see this, like for example here, I'm setting different environmental variables, and because this is run when my shell boots up, these are started, right? These are set at the beginning of each session. So for instance, if you wanted to like set, hey, export that your database name, equals Foursquare development, you can do that here. And let's see it. If you do this, you either need to start a new session, right? Because it starts at the beginning of each session, or you can run like, I believe, source bash profile. And now if I do echo $database name, it's there. Okay? And you can read from this in like from your Python code. You can set, and we'll show how to do that. You can have your Python code read from here. So for example, if I go to CD documents, actually let's just go back here, and we'll do source/dash profile. Right, so now this read from this profile, and now let's go here. We can have let's create a settings.py file. And this is a good spot for it. Settings.py. All right, so import OS, and then it's, I may have to cheat here. Yeah, okay, I didn't have to. os.getEnv. And what did we call this thing? It was database name. All right, and now I can say, like, this is my DB name. Okay, and now let's just put a break. We'll just run this in interactive mode. Python 3-i settings.py. So here we are at the bottom of this file, and if you look at this DB name, it's Foursquare Development. How is that working? We're using the OS library to get like what is the database name. Just the same, it's the equivalent of what we did here with echo $database name. The same way it spits out here, we can get it from Python as well, right? This OS stands for operating system, and the idea is you can perform those bash commands through this library. So again, the way we did this was we set our bash profile, right, to make it more permanent, right, at the beginning of each session, and set the database name equal to Foursquare Development with this keyword of export. So we set the environmental variable, and then we accessed it. First, we saw we can access it with directly from the shell here, and then we saw, okay, we can also access it by using this os.getEnv database name. Yeah? Questions about this before I move on? I'm going to talk about the .m file next, in case you're curious. Okay, so we generally don't want to do this either. Like, it's not great to actually populate our bash profile with things about a project, because think about like how many labs you have. I mean, it's okay maybe in production if you have one like computer is dedicated to one project, but in this case, you know, this can get kind of annoying because we may have conflicts here, right? We have different projects that we're using and they all have different databases. So let's remove this. And there's another alternative we can do. So the alternative is that we can use, so let's close this down. We can use a library called .env. And the documentation is actually pretty good. So it's this python.env is the library. And I think it shows you here. Okay. So this is the idea. The syntax of .env is similar to that of bash, right? So we will create a file literally called dot followed by env, and then put in our things here. Okay, our values here. Yeah, so we'll do that. Okay, so let's create. So one, in the requirements.txt, we should have that library. Right, let's go back. It's called python.env. Okay, so this is a pip library. And then we'll create a new file called .env. Okay, remember the dot means it's like a hidden file. Okay, and now what we'll do is you can call this, this is just convention that lots of times you'll put your environmental variables as all caps. So we'll call it database name equals, and we don't need quotation marks here, I don't believe. All right, so I'll just put Foursquare Development. So this is in my .m file. Now, in my settings.py file, what I need to do is tell Python, hey, instead of just looking at your bash, like your terminal's environment for the database name, load the .env, actually be import, let's look at what the library says. Import from .env, import the load.env function, and then run this function. So what we're saying is, hey, instead of just looking at the normal environment, I want you to go from this library, load the .env, meaning look at this file and load it into your environment. Okay? Now, when I do os.getEnv, it will be looking for database name. We should make sure it matches. It's actually this, right? So I'm just going to copy and paste that here. And now let's run settings.py in interactive mode again. And we can, yeah, this works fine. And I'll just do one more, actually, just to prove to you that this is where it's coming from. Foo equals bar. And then we'll just, over here, we'll just say, you know, something equals O, and this is foo. All right. And now we'll run this, python 3-i settings.py. So if I look at something is bar. Where does that come from? It comes from my .m file, where we have foo equals bar, and then settings.py, where it asks to get env equals foo. And if I look at DB name is Foursquare development by the same logic. Okay. Then so by the time we're in this settings.py, this is a variable now. You know, like DB name is just a variable equal to a string. Right? Once this is loaded, everything is normal back into Python land at this point. So now what we can do is we can say, go here and say something like from settings, import this variable, DB name. And this, remember, this is Foursquare development. Import the DB name. And now connect that here. Right? And then this is the same thing. You know, you'd store your user and password there. So we'll just say username. Oh, we'll just put this as exactly the same variables, user and password. We're going to put that in the settings.py too. So say user, comma password. And then we need to define that here. And the user is Postgres. And password is Postgres, I believe. All right. Oh, and I don't want to do that, do I? I want to do os.getInvolved, get.getInv username. Right, and then os.getEnv password. Now, storing your password in here may not be the best idea. There are alternatives to doing it. For right now, let's just do it, and I can show you some alternatives later. So username, password. So we'll just move that over to this .env. So this will be username equals this. I don't need the quotation marks. And then password. And I just want to double check. So I'm always like double checking that these line up. So settings.py, username, .env, username, password, Postgres. Cool. That's good. Let's run this and just make sure this looks good. No, user. So that's good. DB name. That's good. And then password. That's also good. And now in my main.py, we're accessing it. And let's just make sure this works. Source. No module, no settings. That's not fun. Okay, I think what's breaking is I guess I have to move this inside because this is outside the folder. So for right now, there are other ways to do it. Yeah, I think this is fine. Let's just do this more easily by moving this inside for now. Why? I don't want that. I think we just want... Yeah, we're just going to do this here. Because I'm directly calling main.py, and main.py is looking for a file called settings, right? So it's relative to this file, I believe. And that's working now. So I had to just move settings inside here for now. We will have other ways of setting this up, but for now this works fine. And then if I refresh this, this still works. So even though I'm no longer, right, hard coding these values, this still looks okay. And now, if you think about it, if I want to change from development to production, all I have to do is change this file. All right?
Out of curiosity, how do you exclude the environment from getting sent up to your GitHub, for example, if you wanted to post like a database project?
Yeah, good question. Okay, so typically, lots of times a file like this you don't want to add to GitHub, right? Because it can have your password in it. And so say, like this is an open source project, one, like they don't need there's no reason to add your database password. They're going to create something local or whatever. Okay, so what do you do? Do we have so this is a Git project. We can make touch.git_ignore. So you make a git ignore file, and what I'll put in here is the .env file. So you need to have a path from here to this file. So you can do .env. Now, if I do git status, you don't even see the .env file listed here. Not under the untracked files. It is on my .gitignore file is listed there, but it's saying ignore the .env file. Let's remove this and try it again. Now .env is there, right? So if I do .env and do git status, it's not even allowing me to add the .env file to Git. What you have to do this before you make, if you make a commit with your .env file in it and then you try doing the git ignore, that won't really work kind of correctly because it's in your Git logs, right? So it's not really ignored at that point. So you have to do this before you really ever add the file. And you can also do the same thing with like a new folder, right? Like sample folder. You can just say like, I think it's just sample folder / let's take a look. Yeah, I don't see, right? That's not there. And if I delete it, it's not, maybe it's not a good example. New file is sample.py. Yeah, so here's my sample folder now. And now let's add it to git ignore. Sample folder. I wonder if I can just write sample folder. Yeah, I can. Right, and it's no longer there. So you can put either so I just create a file called .gitignore. This is the special word. .gitignore. And then I list what I want to ignore. .env, this is the file, and then this is the folder if I want to ignore an entire folder. Okay? And then in the documentation, right in the README, you would say something like, hey, to get set up with this, create a .env file and add something like the following, right? So that would be what you do. Other questions? Nice question. One thing to point out, this PyCache is just like, it's like compiling some, it's like, say you haven't changed any of this. I think what's happening is like it will try to speed up by compiling some of the code and not, like recompiling it or whatever. This is trying to speed up, but this is just like junk. You don't really have to mess with this. You can delete it if you want to. Same thing, like this checkpoints folder. Just never open this, please. Like you don't need it. It'll just confuse you or cause confusion. Let me check the chat. Okay. Can you go over what G is? This is a tough one. What G is from the db.py. Okay. Yeah, can I go over this? Okay. So let me see where this is used. I think this G is like a special magical Flask variable where, oh my god, I think I'm gonna have to. Let me see if it's for the testing purposes. See if I can explain this. Do we import G anywhere? It's a weird thing. Okay, this is it. When you have this, create a Flask app with the app context, the database created in the Flask app, inside of this context, that G like holds onto the database. Like this G is relevant You can see you can have this g.db. This is a way to access that database while you are inside this Flask context. So why is something like this useful? Because you can say I'm using this test database, and now inside of this context, like somewhere else in the code, while this test is being run, while I'm inside of these 4 lines, I can, in my code base somewhere else, I believe like access G, and G will be the database that's set up while we're inside here. So it's a Foursquare test database for these 5 lines and then not elsewhere. I'll try to explain that better at a later time. I feel like my understanding is fuzzy in that because of that I'm not doing a great job. But yeah, that's what's going on there. There's other stuff. I want to probably call it here. There's other things that you'll kind of see. Like just one quick thing you'll see is that here I'm using this create app function. The whole point here is that if I have a function that creates my entire Flask app, I can specify here what my Foursquare, I can like set the Foursquare test, the name of the database over here, like in store, and I don't totally want to give a whole lecture on this, but I can store it over here on the application, and then inside, you can imagine that inside, where am I here? In the Flask app, you can now access the database. So imagine if we wrap this whole thing in something called like create app. And now what you can do is just return the application. The application is just an object, right? So we initialize a Flask application, and we set all the routes, and then we return that application. And now we say, okay, well, sometimes we want the database to be, right, like the test database, and sometimes we want it to be, the development database. So why can't I just essentially pass through that as arguments, right? The database name, the user, and the password. This way, I can very easily make this the test database simply by passing through the word Foursquare test here. Something like that, okay? And then when I want to do this for development, let's say I'll have a file maybe called main.py. Oh no, maybe call another file. I don't care. Maybe we'll call run.py. And here what we'll do is we'll say from main, import create app. And now here I'll have my app, call my app.run. And over here I'll pass through Foursquare development, right? So I'm very easily using 2 different databases. This one, when I call the run file, is Foursquare development, which gets passed through, right, and gets set up. Okay, when it's test, right, it's this one. Okay, so and what you can do, and then it's, well, why are we using the settings.py file? Which is a fair question. I think that you'd still store, instead of directly storing this here, you'd import this. It'll be kind of indirect, right? Especially when it comes to things like the password and the database name, or the password and the user, things like that, right? You'd pass this through by importing it from settings, like from settings, import test database, like that variable name, something like that. All right. But the point is, I think you can become familiar with this. That's what this is doing. The whole point of this, or the whole way this works, is simply we'll initialize our Flask app and return it. It's because it's just an object. Throw it over the function. We don't need this anymore. And rather, we can run this by passing creating this and then calling app.run. Creating it, saying, this time I'm going to use the development database. Assign it to this variable app. and then call app.run, debug equals true, or whatever. All right, the readings go into more details about this. Okay. All right, let me stop talking. That got to be a little bit long.